The emergency lights cast a red glow across the faces of every delegate in the council chamber. And Dr. Valith Sorn stood at the center of the room with his hands clasped behind his back as he prepared to deliver the worst news any of them had ever heard. He was a Calliope physician, one of the most respected medical minds across 12 star systems, and his pale blue skin pulsed with soft bioluminescent patterns that revealed his emotional state to anyone who knew how to read them. Right now, those patterns shifted through shades of deep violet and gray, colors that meant sorrow and resignation among his people. The orbital station called Zenith 7 hung in the darkness of space, home to over 50,000 beings from dozens of different species. It was supposed to be a beacon of cooperation between the galactic races, a place where humans and aliens lived and worked together in peace. But now it had become something else entirely, a floating tomb waiting to claim its victims. The pathogen we are dealing with has been classified as the Crimson Blight, Dr. Sorn announced, his voice calm but heavy with grief. In the past 9 days, it has spread through the lower habitation rings of this station and killed 342 individuals. The infected include humans, Kalathi, Voran, and Sithani citizens. Murmurs rippled through the assembled delegates, and the holographic display behind Dr. Sorn flickered to life, showing microscopic images of the virus. It was an ugly thing, covered in protein spikes that looked like tiny red thorns, and it moved through blood cells with terrifying speed. I have spent every waking moment analyzing this pathogen, Dr. Sorn continued, and I must be honest with all of you. The virus mutates faster than anything in recorded galactic medical history. Every time we develop a potential treatment, it changes and renders our work useless. We have run over 14,000 simulations using the most advanced medical computers available to us. He paused and let his words sink in before speaking the sentence that would change everything. The Crimson Blight has no cure. Containment protocols and compassionate end-of-life procedures are our only remaining options. The Varan ambassador rose from his seat, his gray reptilian face showing no emotion as he spoke in his hissing voice. Then, we must act quickly to minimize suffering. I propose we begin accelerated euthanasia protocols for all infected individuals. It is the merciful choice. The Sithani representative, a tall insectoid being with 4 arms and compound eyes that glittered like black gems, clicked her mandibles in agreement. The Voran speaks wisdom. We cannot allow the infected to suffer through the final stages of this disease. Their organs will liquefy while they remain conscious. Death by euthanasia is far kinder. More voices joined in support of the motion, and Dr. Sorn watched as the council moved toward a vote that would sentence over 200 beings, still fighting for their lives to an early death. But one voice cut through the noise like a blade. No. Elena Vasquez stood at the back of the chamber, her dark hair pulled back in a messy ponytail and her white medical coat stained with the evidence of long hours in the quarantine ward. She was a human xenovirologist from Earth, specifically from the Buenos Aires Medical Institute, and she had been working alongside Dr. Sorn since the outbreak began. You cannot ask me to sign death warrants for patients who are still alive, she declared, stepping forward with fire burning in her brown eyes. You are giving up on them. The Varan ambassador turned his cold gaze upon her. Dr. Vasquez, we understand that humans are relatively new to galactic society. You have only been spacefaring for 2 centuries. Perhaps you do not yet comprehend that some battles simply cannot be won. I comprehend perfectly well, Elena shot back. I comprehend that you have decided it is easier to kill my patients than to keep searching for answers. Dr. Sorn raised a hand in a gesture meant to calm the situation. Elena, please understand that this brings me no joy. I have dedicated my life to healing, but we have exhausted every avenue of research. The simulations show no path to a cure. Continuing to give the infected false hope would be cruel. Elena felt her hands trembling at her sides, and she forced herself to take a breath before speaking again. There are 217 people in that quarantine ward. Valeth? 217 people who are counting on us to save them. And one of them is my brother. The chamber fell silent at her words. Marco Vasquez was 28 years old, a structural engineer who had come to Zenith 7 to help build the new expansion modules. He had been so excited to work alongside aliens for the first time, to be part of something bigger than himself. Now he lay in a quarantine bed with crimson spots spreading across his skin, fighting a battle he did not know how to win. He was on day 4 of the infection. The average survival time was 9 days. Elena had 5 days left to save him, and the council was asking her to help kill him instead. "I am sorry about your brother," Dr. Soren said gently, his bioluminescent patterns shifting to a softer shade of blue that indicated sympathy. "Truly I am. But our personal attachments cannot cloud our judgment. We must think of the greater good." Elena stared at him for a long moment, and when she spoke, her voice was quiet, but filled with steel. "The greater good? You want to talk to me about the greater good? Every person in that ward has someone who loves them. Every single one of them has a family waiting and praying for them to come home. And you want me to inject them with poison because your computers told you to give up?" "The simulations are clear," the Sithani representative interjected. "There is no cure. To continue searching is to waste resources that could be used to protect the uninfected." Elena laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. "Your simulations, your models, your projections. That is all any of you ever talk about. Have any of you ever considered that maybe your simulations do not know everything? That maybe there are answers your computers cannot find?" Dr. Soren shook his head slowly. "Elena, I know this is difficult, but you must accept reality. The Crimson Blight cannot be stopped. The kindest thing we can do now is ensure that the infected pass peacefully rather than in agony." Elena looked around the chamber at all the alien faces watching her with pity and condescension, and she realized that none of them would ever understand. They saw her grief as a weakness, her refusal to surrender as primitive stubbornness. They had already decided that the fight was over. But Elena Vasquez had not come this far to watch her brother die while she did nothing. "You are asking me to kill my brother," she said slowly, "because you have decided to stop trying. I will not do it. I refuse." She turned and walked toward the door, ignoring the calls from the delegates behind her. Dr. Soren called out one final time. "Elena, where are you going?" "There is nothing more you can do." She paused at the threshold and looked back at him with eyes that burned with determination. "Watch me," she said. And then she was gone, striding through the corridors of the station with a purpose that terrified her and gave her strength all at once. The council could vote however they wanted. They could pass their euthanasia protocols and pat themselves on the back for being merciful. But Elena would not stop. She would not surrender. She would find a way to save her brother, or she would die trying. That was what it meant to be human. Elena made her way through the winding corridors of Zenith 7 until she reached Level 9, a section of the station that had been abandoned years ago when budget cuts forced the closure of several research facilities. The lights here were dim, and the air carried a stale quality that spoke of neglect. But the equipment in the old laboratory still worked. She sealed the door behind her and activated the computer systems one by one, watching as screens flickered to life and filled the room with pale blue light. This place had once been a xenobiology research center, and it contained everything she would need: gene sequencers, electron microscopes, chemical synthesizers, and most importantly, complete isolation from anyone who might try to stop her. For the next several hours, Elena immersed herself in data, pulling up every piece of information that existed about the Crimson Blight. She studied the molecular structure of the virus, analyzed the patterns of mutation, and examined the detailed reports from every failed treatment attempt. The Calathi had gathered an enormous amount of data, far more than human scientists could have collected in such a short time. But as Elena reviewed their methodology, she noticed something that made her pause. Every single treatment had been tested through computer simulations. Every potential cure had been modeled in virtual environments before being rejected. The Calathi had used robotic proxies to administer experimental compounds to infected tissue samples, and they had run millions of calculations to predict outcomes. Not once had any researcher tested anything on themselves. Elena leaned back in her chair and felt a strange mixture of disbelief and dark amusement rising in her chest. She accessed the Galactic Medical Database and searched for information about research ethics across different species, and what she found confirmed her suspicions. Under Galactic Compact law, physician self-experimentation was strictly forbidden. It was considered barbaric, primitive, and unethical. The very idea of a doctor using their own body as a test subject was viewed with horror and disgust by virtually every advanced civilization. Such practices belong to the dark ages of medical history, to times before enlightened beings understood the proper way to conduct research. Elena laughed out loud in the empty laboratory. She thought about Earth and the long history of human medicine. She thought about Barry Marshall, the Australian doctor who drank a solution filled with bacteria to prove that ulcers were caused by infection rather than stress. He had given himself a terrible stomach illness on purpose, and he had won the Nobel Prize for his discovery. She thought about Jonas Salk, who had injected himself and his own family with his experimental polio vaccine before giving it to anyone else. He had refused to patent his creation because he believed it belonged to humanity. She thought about Stubbins Firth, a medical student who had been so convinced that yellow fever was not contagious that he had poured infected vomit into cuts on his own arms and even drank the stuff to prove his theory. He had been wrong about the disease, but his courage was undeniable. Human medical history was filled with such stories, doctors and scientists who had used their own bodies as laboratories because they refused to ask others to take risks they would not take themselves. It was reckless and dangerous, and sometimes fatal, but it was also how humanity had conquered some of the worst diseases ever known. The aliens thought such behavior was madness. They could not understand why any rational being would deliberately harm themselves in the pursuit of knowledge. But Elena understood perfectly. When you loved someone, when you were desperate to save them, you did whatever it took. You did not wait for computer simulations to give you permission. You did not hide behind safety protocols while the people you cared about died. You took action, even if that action might cost you everything. Elena turned back to the data and began working with renewed focus. She studied the protein shell of the Crimson Blight, looking for weaknesses that the Calathi simulations might have missed. The virus was clever, constantly changing its outer surface to avoid detection by the immune system. But Elena noticed a pattern in the chaos. There was a brief window during each mutation cycle when certain proteins remained stable. If she could develop a compound that targeted those specific proteins during that window, she might be able to disrupt the virus before it could adapt. It was a long shot. The Calathi simulations gave her approach only a 12% chance of success. Even worse, the same simulations suggested a 40% chance that the treatment would actually accelerate the progress of the disease and cause faster death. Elena stared at those numbers for a long time. 12% chance of a cure, 40% chance of making things worse, and the remaining 48% represented outcomes that were simply unknown, possibilities that the simulations could not predict. If she followed proper protocols, She would need months of additional testing before she could even consider using this compound on a living being. But Marco did not have months. He had days. Every hour that passed brought him closer to the point of no return. Elena made her decision. She moved to the chemical synthesizer and began inputting the formula for her experimental antiviral compound. The machine hummed and whirred as it assembled the molecules according to her specifications, and 30 minutes later she held a small vial of clear liquid in her hands. This was it. This was either going to save lives or kill her. Elena set up a camera to record everything and positioned herself in front of the lens. She wanted there to be a complete record of what she was about to do, so that even if she died, her data might help someone else finish what she had started. "My name is Dr. Elena Vasquez," she said to the camera. "The date is November 17th, 2347. I am about to conduct an unauthorized self-experimentation trial involving a live sample of the Crimson Blight pathogen and an untested antiviral compound of my own design." She took a breath and continued. "I am doing this because the official medical response to this outbreak has been to surrender. The leading experts have declared that there is no cure and have recommended euthanasia for all infected individuals. I refuse to accept that verdict. My brother is among the infected, and I will not let him die without a fight." Elena prepared 2 syringes, one containing the live virus and one containing her experimental treatment. Her hands were steady as she swabbed her arm with antiseptic. "The simulations give this approach a 12% chance of success," she said. "But simulations cannot account for everything. The human immune system is unpredictable in ways that computer models do not fully understand. I am betting my life on the possibility that our biology will surprise them." She picked up the first syringe and positioned it against her arm. "If I die, I want my brother to know that I love him. I want him to know that I tried. And I want the medical community to learn from my data and keep searching for answers." Without hesitation, Elena pushed the needle into her flesh and injected herself with the Crimson Blight. She felt nothing at first, just a small sting of the needle and then emptiness. The virus was inside her now, spreading through her bloodstream, beginning its terrible work. In a few hours, the symptoms would start. In a few days, she would know whether she had found a cure or sentenced herself to death. Elena picked up the second syringe and administered the experimental antiviral. "Treatment administered at time 0, she said to the camera. "I will document all symptoms, vital signs, and blood work at regular intervals. If this works, we will have our cure. If it fails, I hope my sacrifice will not be in vain." She set a timer for 72 hours and settled into her chair. The waiting had begun. The first 12 hours passed without incident, and Elena almost allowed herself to hope that the treatment was working. She monitored her vital signs constantly, drew blood samples every 2 hours, and recorded detailed notes about how she felt. Everything seemed normal. Her temperature was steady. Her heart rate was calm, and she experienced no unusual symptoms. But she knew this peace would not last. The Crimson Blight always started slowly. It crept through the body like a thief in the night, multiplying in the shadows of the bloodstream. Before revealing itself, the virus was patient and cunning, and it did not announce its presence until it was ready to strike. Our A-team brought the first sign that the battle had truly begun. Elena was running another blood analysis when she felt a strange warmth spreading through her body. At first, she thought the laboratory heating system had malfunctioned, but a quick check of her temperature revealed the truth. Her fever had spiked to 39.5 degrees Celsius and was still climbing. She documented the reading and continued her work, but soon other symptoms demanded her attention. Her joints began to ache with a deep throbbing pain that made every movement difficult. Her head pounded with pressure that seemed to build behind her eyes, and when she looked down at her forearms, she saw them tiny crimson pinpricks scattered across her skin like drops of blood beneath the surface. The hemorrhaging had begun. Elena felt fear trying to claw its way into her mind, but she forced it back with sheer willpower. Fear would not save her brother. Fear would not find a cure. Only data and determination could do that. So she pushed aside her terror and focused on the science. She ran test after test on her blood samples, comparing the results to the projections from the Kalathi simulations. Something strange was happening. Her antibody response was different than expected. The experimental compound was interacting with her immune system in ways that the computer models had not predicted. But was it working? Elena could not tell yet. The virus was still spreading, still mutating, still attacking her body with relentless fury. The antiviral was doing something, but whether that something was helpful or harmful remained unclear. Hour 24 found Elena struggling to stay upright. Her fever had climbed to 40.1 degrees, and sweat soaked through her clothes despite the cool air of the laboratory. The crimson spots on her arms had spread to her legs and torso, and she could taste blood when she coughed. She was dying. She could feel it happening, cell by cell, organ by organ. The crimson blight was consuming her from the inside, and there was nothing she could do but watch and record and hope. It was during hour 30 that Dr. Velis Sorn finally found her. He had noticed her absence from the station shortly after the council meeting, and at first he had assumed she simply needed time alone to process her grief. But as the hours passed and she failed to respond to any communications, concern had grown into alarm. He had used his medical override codes to track her biosignature through the station, and the trail had led him here, to a forgotten laboratory on level 9. The door slid open and Sorn stepped inside, his bioluminescent skin already shifting to shades of deep purple that indicated shock and distress. What he saw froze him in place. Elena sat hunched over a workstation, her skin pale and covered in crimson blotches, her hands trembling as she fed another blood sample into the analyzer. She looked like death walking, like a corpse that had not yet realized it should lie down. "By the 17 moons," Sorn whispered. "Elena, what have you done?" She looked up at him with eyes that burned with fever and determination. "I infected myself," she said, her voice hoarse and weak. "Injected the virus directly into my bloodstream, along with an experimental antiviral compound. I'm on hour 30 now." Sorn felt his legs go weak beneath him. "This is insanity. This is absolute madness. You have sentenced yourself to death." "Maybe," Elena agreed. "Or maybe I've found something your simulations missed. Look at this data, Velis. My antibody response is not following the predicted pattern. The compound is interacting with human-specific T-cell receptors in ways that were never modeled." She shoved a datapad toward him with shaking hands, and Sorn took it almost without thinking. His medical training compelled him to examine the information, even as his mind reeled from the horror of what she had done. The numbers did not make sense. According to every simulation, Elena should be experiencing rapid cellular breakdown by now. Her organs should be failing. Her blood should be losing its ability to clot, and she should be slipping into unconsciousness. But while she was clearly suffering, she was also clearly fighting, and the data suggested that something unusual was happening inside her body. "This is unprecedented," Sorn murmured. "These readings defy everything we thought we knew about this virus." "Humans are unpredictable," Elena said with a weak smile. "Our immune systems did not evolve in the same careful, controlled way that yours did. We come from a world that tried to kill us every single day. And our biology learned to fight dirty." Sorn looked up from the datapad and met her fevered gaze. "I am bound by oath to report this. Self-experimentation is a violation of every medical code in the Galactic Compact. What you have done is illegal." Then report me. Elena replied, "After I'm dead, you can tell everyone what a terrible criminal I was. But right now, I need your help. I need you to document everything because I might not stay conscious much longer." She was right about that. Even as she spoke, Soren could see her struggling to keep her eyes open. The fever was burning through her energy reserves, and soon her body would force her into unconsciousness, whether she wanted it or not. Soren faced a choice in that moment, a choice that would define the rest of his life. He could follow the rules, report her violation, and let her die alone in this abandoned laboratory. Or he could stay and help her, breaking every protocol he had sworn to uphold. He thought about all the patients in the quarantine ward. He thought about the 342 beings who had already died. He thought about the vote the council was preparing to take, the vote that would end the lives of everyone still fighting. And then he thought about Elena, this small, fragile human who had deliberately infected herself with a fatal disease because she loved her brother and refused to give up. Soren had lived for over 200 years. He had seen countless acts of courage and sacrifice across a dozen worlds. But he had never witnessed anything quite like this. No Calathi would ever do what Elena had done. No Vorin, no Sithani, no member of any civilized species would dream of using their own body as a laboratory. It was primitive and reckless and completely irrational. And yet here she sat, dying on purpose, because she believed she could learn something that might save others. Why? Soren asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Why would you do this to yourself?" Elena coughed, and flecks of blood appeared on her lips. She wiped them away with the back of her hand and looked at him with eyes that held no regret. "Because Marco is on day 5 now," she said. "Because every hour I waste is an hour closer to losing him forever. Because I would rather die trying than live knowing I did nothing." She reached out and grabbed his arm with surprising strength. "Help me, Valeth. Help me save my brother. Help me prove that surrender is not the only option." Soren looked at her hand on his arm, at the crimson spots spreading across her skin, at the fierce light that still burned in her dying eyes. And then he pulled up a chair and sat down beside her. "Tell me what you need," he said. Elena smiled through her pain, and for a moment Soren thought he understood something important about humans, something his people had never grasped. They were not primitive. They were not irrational. They were simply willing to pay prices that others would never consider. And that made them the most dangerous and the most wonderful beings in the entire galaxy. Hour 52 found Dr. Soren standing over Elena's unconscious form, his hands moving across the medical scanner with practiced precision, while his mind struggled to process what the readings were telling him. She should be dead by now. According to every model, every simulation, every piece of data the Calathi had gathered about the Crimson Blight, Elena Vasquez should have entered complete organ failure at least 6 hours ago. Her fever had spiked to 41.2 degrees Celsius, a temperature that should have caused permanent brain damage. Blood seeped from her gums and pooled in the corners of her eyes, evidence that the hemorrhaging had reached critical levels. And yet her heart continued to beat. Her lungs continued to breathe. Her brain activity remained stable, showing patterns consistent with deep but natural sleep rather than coma or shutdown. Something impossible was happening inside her body. Soren ran the analysis again, then a third time, convinced that the equipment must be malfunctioning. But the results remained the same each time, defying everything he thought he knew about medicine. Elena's viral load was dropping. It was not happening quickly. It was not happening cleanly. The process was messy and chaotic, with readings that jumped up and down in patterns that seemed almost random. But the overall trend was unmistakable. The amount of virus in her bloodstream was decreasing. The antiviral compound was working. But that was not the most remarkable part. As Soren studied the data more carefully, he began to understand what was really happening. The compound Elena had designed was not destroying the virus on its own. Instead, it was doing something far more elegant. It was marking the virus in a way that her immune system could recognize, even as the pathogen tried to mutate and hide. And her immune system was responding with ferocity that Soren had never seen in any species. Human T-cells were swarming the marked virus particles and tearing them apart. White blood cells were multiplying at rates that should have been impossible, flooding her bloodstream with defenders that adapted and evolved almost as quickly as the virus itself. It was not a careful, measured response like a healthy immune system would produce. It was total war, a biological apocalypse happening on a cellular level. The simulations had never predicted this because the simulations were based on healthy biology, on the assumption that all advanced immune systems worked in similar ways. But human beings had evolved on a death world, a planet filled with predators and parasites and plagues that had tried to wipe them out for millions of years. Their immune systems had not learned to seek balance. They had learned to fight with everything they had. Where healthy biology sought equilibrium, human biology waged war without mercy. Elena stirred on the examination table, and her eyes fluttered open. She looked terrible pale as death, covered in healing splotches, her lips cracked and her hair matted with sweat. But she was awake, and she was alive, and that alone was a miracle. "What time is it?" she croaked. "Hour 53, Soren replied, his voice trembling with emotions he could not name. "Elena, your viral load is decreasing. The treatment is working." She stared at him for a long moment, as if she could not quite believe what he was saying. Then a smile spread across her ravaged face, a smile of triumph and relief and exhausted joy. "I knew it," she whispered. "I knew those simulations were wrong." She tried to sit up and nearly collapsed, but Soren caught her and helped her into a more comfortable position. "You should rest," he urged. "Your body has been through an incredible ordeal." "Rest later," Elena insisted. "First, we need to modify the formula. My antibody response shows exactly which proteins the compound should target. We can make it more effective, more precise." She began dictating changes to the formula, her mind sharp despite her physical weakness, and Soren found himself racing to keep up. He synthesized the new version of the compound according to her instructions, his hands shaking with a mixture of hope and fear. When it was ready, Elena studied the vial for a long moment. "We need to test it on other humans," she said. "My brother first. He's on day 6 now. We might already be too late." Soren hesitated. "Elena, the Council has not authorized any new treatments. If we administer this compound without permission, we will both face severe consequences." "Valeth," Elena said quietly, "my brother is dying. 200 other people are dying. If we wait for permission, they will all be dead before the paperwork is processed. I did not infect myself just to watch Marco die while bureaucrats debate." She was right, of course. Soren knew she was right. The Council would deliberate for days, maybe weeks, before approving human trials of an unauthorized compound. By then, everyone in quarantine would be gone. "I could lose my medical license," Soren murmured. "And I could lose my brother," Elena replied. "Which matters more to you, your career or their lives?" It was not a fair question, but it was an honest one. Soren thought about all the oaths he had taken, all the rules he had sworn to follow, all the protocols that were supposed to guide his every action. Then he thought about the look in Elena's eyes when she had injected herself with a fatal disease because she refused to give up on someone she loved. "Let us go save your brother," he said. They made their way through the station together, Elena leaning heavily on Soren for support as they walked. The quarantine ward was located 3 levels down, behind sealed doors and decontamination, chambers that were designed to contain the deadliest pathogens known to galactic science. The guards stationed outside the ward looked shocked to see them, especially Elena, whose appearance left no doubt that she was infected. "Dr. Vasquez?" One guard stammered. "You should not be out of isolation. You are carrying the virus." "I know exactly what I am carrying," Elena replied. "And I am also carrying the cure. Now let me in to see my brother." The guards exchanged uncertain glances, but something in Elena's voice made them step aside. Perhaps they recognized the determination of someone who would not be stopped. Perhaps they were simply too stunned to argue. The ward was a place of suffering and despair. Rows of beds stretched across the room, each one holding a patient in various stages of the disease. The air smelled of antiseptic and fear, and the soft beeping of medical monitors created a grim symphony of fading hope. Marco lay in a bed near the far wall, his once healthy body now ravaged by the crimson blight. His skin was covered in the telltale red spots, and his breathing came in shallow, painful gasps. He was unconscious, lost in the fevered dreams that came before the end. Elena knelt beside his bed and took his hand in hers. "Hey, little brother," she said softly. "I told you I would not give up on you." She looked up at Soren and nodded. The Kalathi doctor administered the modified antiviral compound, injecting it directly into Marco's bloodstream. "Now we wait," Elena said. They chose 2 other human patients to receive the treatment as well, both of them on day 5, both of them running out of time. The modified compound entered their systems, and Soren began monitoring their vital signs with obsessive attention. Hour after hour passed, and at first nothing seemed to change. The patients remained unconscious. Their fevers continued to burn, and the crimson spots on their skin showed no signs of fading. But then, around hour 36 after treatment, something remarkable happened. Marco's viral load began to drop. It was the same pattern Soren had observed in Elena: chaotic, unpredictable, but undeniably positive. The human immune system was engaging the marked virus and destroying it with that same terrifying ferocity. The other 2 patients showed similar improvement within hours. By hour 48, all 3 were showing clear signs of recovery. Their fevers had broken, their hemorrhaging had stopped, and their blood work showed viral loads approaching 0. Elena stood in the ward surrounded by recovering patients, and tears streamed down her face. She had done it. Against all odds, against all predictions, against the judgment of every expert in the galaxy, she had found a cure. Soren watched her crying and felt his own emotions threatening to overwhelm him. In his 200 years of life, he had never witnessed anything so extraordinary. "You use yourself as a prototype," he whispered in amazement. Elena laughed through her tears. "We call it a proof of concept," she replied. "Now stop staring and help me figure out how to adapt this for non-human species. We have a lot more lives to save." The cure spread through Zenith 7 like hope given physical form. At first it only worked on humans. Elena's formula had been designed around human biology, and it required the unique characteristics of the human immune system to function properly. But the data she had gathered from her self-experimentation provided the key that Dr. Soren and his team needed to unlock adaptations for other species. Within 1 week, they had developed a modified treatment for Kalathi patients. 3 days later, they cracked the code for Voran physiology. The Zathani version took the longest, requiring almost 2 full weeks of intensive research, but eventually it too emerged from the laboratory ready to save lives. The Crimson Blight was eradicated from the station in exactly 31 days from the moment Elena had first injected herself with the virus. Final death toll: 406 beings across all species. Without the cure, projections had estimated that over 12,000 would have died before the outbreak burned itself out. Elena and Soren had saved nearly 11,000 lives through their reckless, unauthorized, completely illegal actions. The laws were laws, and the Galactic Compact did not look kindly on those who broke them. Elena stood before a panel of medical ethicists in the Grand Tribunal chamber on Xena 7, her hands clasped behind her back and her chin held high. She wore a simple gray suit that contrasted sharply with the elaborate robes of the judges before her, and she looked small and fragile against the vastness of the chamber. But appearances could be deceiving. Everyone who had seen Elena Vasquez fight knew that she was anything but fragile. The lead arbiter was an ancient Sithani named High Judge Crix, whose compound eyes had witnessed over 6 centuries of galactic history. When she spoke, her clicking voice carried the weight of countless judgments rendered and sentences passed. "Dr. Elena Vasquez of Earth," Judge Crix began, "you stand accused of 17 separate violations of the Galactic Medical Ethics Compact. You deliberately infected yourself with a deadly pathogen without authorization. You developed and administered experimental treatments without proper approval. You encouraged the licensed physician to abandon his ethical obligations and participate in your illegal activities." Elena said nothing. There was nothing to say every accusation was true. "These are serious charges," Judge Crix continued. "Self-experimentation has been forbidden under comp law for over 3,000 years. The prohibition exists to protect physicians from the temptation to take foolish risks and to ensure that medical research follows proper protocols designed to produce reliable results." The judge paused and studied Elena with those glittering compound eyes. "Do you have anything to say in your defense?" Elena took a breath and spoke clearly. "I do not deny what I did. I infected myself with the Crimson Blight because I believed it was the only way to find a cure in time to save the infected. I was right. My actions led directly to the development of a treatment that saved nearly 11,000 lives." "That is not a defense," one of the other judges interjected. "The ends do not justify the means. If we excuse your violations because the outcome was positive, we open the door to chaos. Every researcher who wants to skip proper protocols will claim they are acting for the greater good." "I understand that," Elena replied, "and I accept whatever punishment this tribunal deems appropriate. But I want to make something clear. I would do it again. If I were faced with the same situation tomorrow, I would make the same choice. Because some things matter more than rules. My brother's life matters more than protocols. The lives of 11,000 beings matter more than my medical license." The chamber fell silent at her words. Judge Crix conferred with the other arbiters in low, clicking whispers. The deliberation seemed to stretch on forever, and Elena felt sweat forming on her palms despite her outward calm. She had accepted that her career was over, but she did not know what other punishments might await her. Imprisonment was a real possibility, or exile from civilized space, or worse. Finally, Judge Crix turned back to face her. "Dr. Vasquez," the ancient Sithani said slowly, "your actions were reckless. They were primitive by the standards of advanced galactic civilization. They violated 17 separate articles of medical law, and they set a precedent that this tribunal cannot simply ignore." Elena braced herself for the worst. "They were also," Judge Crix continued, "the most extraordinary act of medical courage this body has witnessed in 400 years. Elena blinked in surprise. "We have spent the past week reviewing every aspect of your case," the judge explained. "We have studied your methodology, analyzed your data, and interviewed dozens of witnesses. And we have come to an uncomfortable conclusion. Your approach worked precisely because it violated our established protocols." Judge Crix rose from her seat and spread her forearms in a gesture that indicated profound respect. "Human biology is unpredictable in ways that our simulations cannot model. Your willingness to test treatments on yourself provided data that no computer could generate. The chaos of your immune response revealed possibilities that centuries of careful research had missed. The judge paused and let her words sink in. We cannot punish innovation simply because it frightens us. We cannot condemn courage simply because it makes us uncomfortable. Dr. Vasquez broke our laws, but in doing so, she exposed a fundamental flaw in our approach to medicine: the assumption that safety and progress can always coexist. Elena felt her heart pounding as hope began to rise in her chest. All charges against Dr. Elena Vasquez are hereby dismissed, Judge Crix announced. Furthermore, this tribunal will recommend the creation of new provisions in galactic medical law provisions that will allow for voluntary physician self-experimentation under extreme circumstances when standard protocols have failed. The chamber erupted in murmurs and gasps, but Judge Crix silenced them with a gesture. These provisions will be known as the Vasquez Protocols. They will be a reminder to all physicians across the galaxy that sometimes the greatest advances require the greatest sacrifices, and that courage should be celebrated rather than punished. Elena felt tears streaming down her face, and she did not bother to wipe them away. After the tribunal, she found Dr. Sorn waiting for her outside the chamber. He stood beside a viewport that looked out over the stars, his bioluminescent skin shifting through colors that she had learned to recognize as happiness and wonder. "Congratulations," he said. "You have made history." Elena joined him at the viewport and watched the distant lights of other stations and ships moving through the darkness. "I did not do it alone. You helped me when no one else would. You risked everything to save people you did not even know." Sorn was quiet for a moment before he spoke again. "I have been thinking about what you did," he said. "I have been trying to understand why a human would deliberately infect themselves with a fatal disease for the chance, not the certainty, but the chance of saving others. It goes against every instinct my species possesses." "And what have you concluded?" Elena asked. Sorn turned to face her, and his skin shifted to a color she had never seen before, a warm golden glow that seemed to radiate from within. "I still do not fully understand humans," he admitted. "You live such short lives compared to most galactic species. 80 years, perhaps 100 if you are fortunate. And yet, you risk those brief lives so readily, as if they were currency to be spent rather than treasures to be hoarded." Elena smiled. "Maybe that is exactly why we do it. We do not have centuries to wait for perfect answers. We do not have time to run millions of simulations while people we love are dying. So we take risks that others consider insane because the alternative is watching helplessly while the clock runs out." She looked out at the stars again. "Besides," she added, "what is the point of living if you will not fight for the people you love? A long life spent in safety means nothing if you spend it full of regret for the things you were too afraid to try." Soren processed her words in silence, and his skin continued to shift through that warm golden color. "I think I have learned something from you," he finally said. "Something that no Calathi University could ever teach me." "What is that?" Soren turned to face her fully, and there was something new in his ancient eyes, a spark of understanding that had not been there before. "Humans are absolutely terrifying," he said. "You are reckless and emotional, and you take risks that make no logical sense. You throw yourselves into danger without hesitation, driven by bonds of love and loyalty that override your survival instincts." He paused and allowed a small smile to cross his alien features. "And I am deeply grateful that your species chose to be our allies rather than our enemies." Elena laughed a real laugh, full of joy and relief and hope for the future. Somewhere behind her, she heard footsteps approaching. She turned to see Marco walking toward her, still pale and thin from his ordeal, but alive and growing stronger every day. He wrapped his arms around her in a fierce embrace, and she held him tight. "Thank you," he whispered. "Thank you for not giving up on me." Elena closed her eyes and breathed in the reality of her brother's survival. The warmth of his body, the sound of his voice, the proof that her gamble had paid off. "I would do it 1,000 times," she told him. "For you, I would do anything." Sorn watched the siblings embrace, and he felt something shift inside his ancient heart. He had spent centuries studying,